Hey there, Econ 365, one more chapter to go, chapter 12 on crime and punishment. And it's going to bear similarities to a lot of the things we've talked about, but there are some unique twists, of course, because crime is different than the voluntary, most of the time voluntary transactions, not always, obviously the torts are not, but a different level of severity with regards to what is going on with that. So the first question is that we will address is what is considered a crime, and actually we'll turn to page 457 of the book because there's a good diagram that kind of shows where torts go into criminal activity, since both of them are involuntary. And then we ask what should be the consequences of committing a crime. And things have gotten better over the last several decades, but for a long time, a pretty good rule of thumb was that crime affected about 1/3 of households every year. It could be minor things, obviously property damage, property crimes as opposed to crimes to a person. Okay. So it does seem awfully similar to torts because you've got an injurer and you've got a victim. And the injurer could be someone who robs you. Okay. You don't have to be physically hurt, but you may be emotionally hurt because someone has stolen something from you, whatever. But in the case of torts, we were looking at accidental harm. And here there's going to be some distinct differences. So let's lay out the differences first. I'll bring up that diagram that's on 457, and then we will proceed in discussing why crime is a bad thing, kind of obvious, and then some of the things that we ought to do about it. Okay, so the first thing with regards to criminal activity is intent, right? Did somebody mean to do something, or were they simply negligent, spaced out for a second, got distracted, and didn't mean to do someone? Think about this, and it has happened in too many circumstances. We had it happen not all that long ago in Toronto, Canada. We had it happen a number of years ago at UC Santa Barbara. We've had it happen in Europe many times where someone's in a vehicle and they just decide to plow down people, okay? That clearly there's an issue of intent with respect to those actions. Then you've got another, not all that old, pretty famous case in the LA area, and that is the Santa Monica farmers market case, which I actually was involved in some of the analysis. And that is where this older man hit the gas instead of the brakes, basically, and ran over a bunch of people, killing many and injuring many. And was there intent there? And even if there's not intent, if something is severe enough with regards to how someone is hurt, that the non-criminal can veer into the criminal. Okay, so that's the first thing. What is the intent? Second thing that is unique about the criminal law and criminal actions versus everything that we've done this semester is the harm is done to the state, not just a private individual. Private individual can then go to civil court to sue for damages, as what happened in the O.J. civil trial. But the criminal actions are undertaken by the government. So the plaintiff is actually the state. And by the state, of course, we mean it could be the city, the county, the state, the federal government, but it is government, not a private person, okay? Because as you'll see, the actions of criminal activity are considered so severe that it is an affront to all of society, not just to the person who ends up getting mugged or shot or run over or whatever the circumstance might be. As we learned, chapter 3, higher standard of proof, unanimity. All right, so it's not the weight of the evidence, but it's got to be within a reasonable doubt. And if you're to doubt someone's guilt, then you have to declare them innocent. Right? And the penalty here is primarily based on punishment of some sort, as opposed to simply a monetary judgment. So in a tort case, somebody runs somebody over, but it was an accident, you're suing for damages. Here, if it was done intentionally, you are trying to put the person away. There'd be some sort of consequence, a significant consequence to their actions. Okay. And if we go to the diagram on page 457, you can see sort of the continuum here in terms of careful behavior, okay, where the individual is going to be blameless. Okay, that goes back to having enough precaution that you're taking that you're not going to be held at fault. Negligent, you're going to be in the forbidden zone, but you're negligent, it's not willful. And here, of course, we're still in the civil world, but we're starting to veer over with reckless behavior, and then we've got intent, and then we've got cruelty. Okay, so we've got would help if I could read all this. We've got guilt, we've got fault, and this area here, of course, is what we're concerned about when we're dealing with criminal activity. Okay, why do we care? And obviously we're looking in the mind of the injurer, and it's not always crystal clear as to whether somebody intended to do it or not. Sometimes obvious, not always obvious. Why is criminal behavior so harmful to society that the actions are actually taken by the state, by government? Well, first off, it reduces public welfare, okay? It makes us worse off to be living in a criminal environment, okay? And it is believed that that also includes victimless crimes. Now, the laws have changed over time, but drug use, historically, all illicit drugs, and now some, of course, are legal, but drug use, prostitution, illegal gambling, why are they crimes? Because the general notion is they're considered harmful to the welfare and security of society, okay? So it leads to sort of a breakdown of the social order, and that's why even those where you say, well, who's really being harmed if somebody voluntarily wants to, hire a prostitute, because it goes against the norms of society, basically. Okay? Even attempted crimes are harmful to society because they cause fear. So the mere fact that someone broke in, but you chased them, they didn't steal anything. Have they committed a crime? Of course, they've committed a crime. So even trying and failing should lead to punishment. Okay. As we learned a very long time ago in this class, criminal activity involves a higher proof because the general notion is it's better to let a guilty person run free than to convict an innocent person. Okay? So the benefit of the doubt goes to the accused in a situation like this. In addition, you have to remember, since the state is the plaintiff here, they're the ones bringing the action, they have enormous resources at their disposal, and this is a way of protecting against overzealous prosecutors who want to go after everything. But so the bar is set very, very high, okay? And the reality is that in many cases, even those not found guilty usually carry a stigma associated with it. I mean, the OJ case is an obvious one. There have been a lot of high-profile cases involving people in the entertainment industry, and until Phil Spector was found guilty of murder, almost none of those accused ever were actually found guilty. They could marshal a lot of resources to present elaborate defenses that would cast doubt one way or another on the credibility of the prosecution and the actions that they're taking. taken. And but the thing is, even if they're found not guilty, oftentimes people wonder, well, were they really not guilty? So there's a lot of reasons why the bar is set very high with criminal activity. Okay, what do you do for a criminal act? Well, you punish. Okay, so what does punishment mean? Well, prison, okay, of course, probation, so that somebody is not going to be incarcerated, but they have to check in regularly with an officer of the court to essentially monitor their behavior. A fine, so even though there's a monetary judgment here, it's more of a punishment rather than restitution to make someone whole. And we don't do this anymore. To the extent it still exists, it's probably going to be in the southern part of the United States, and that would be forced labor, where you are incarcerated, but you're incarcerated such that you're going to actually have to do physical work, okay? Indeed, Jim Morrison of The Doors. I hope you know who The Doors were. If not, I can't help you. Famous musical group from the late 60s, and then he died in 71. And he was arrested for indecent exposure in Florida at a concert. He was appealing it at the time that he died, but his sentence was actually to forced labor, to actually be working on like a chain gang kind of thing. But it didn't come to pass. Obviously, that's less common these days. Now, punishment is, as I gave you a little hint with the fines, is not analogous to compensation in a civil case. Because remember when we first talked about torts, compensation is designed to get someone back to their original level of utility. Here, you want to make the individual worse off without necessarily benefiting the victim. Okay, we can go back to OJ for a second because it's such a well-known case that OJ was found not guilty in the criminal action. If he was found guilty in the criminal action, there would have been a penalty imposed on him, but there would not have been any sort of award of restitution to the families of the victims. That involved the civil trial, and the civil trial there was an award, although very little of that has actually been obtained by the plaintiffs in that case. So very little of the money has actually been paid out. Okay, so what does economic theory have to say about criminal activity? Use your common sense here. Go back to benefits versus costs. People respond to incentives. So if we believe that the criminal mind is to at least some extent rational, okay? Irrational behavior, someone may then be found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent to a mental institution for some period of time. But the belief is that people do respond to the benefits and costs associated with criminal activity. So if you somehow lower the benefits or increase the costs, then that would be a way to reduce criminal behavior. Okay. All right, let's pick this up in lecture part 2.